Imagine you're walking into a shoe store. You see a wall full of sneakers. Right there in the middle is Nike. For decades, that's all people needed to see. The swoosh logo, the brand, the status, the cool factor. Nike wasn't just selling shoes, it was selling identity. But today, something strange is happening. Nike is still one of the biggest companies in the world. It still spends billions on marketing. It still sponsors the biggest athletes. And yet, its biggest threat isn't Adidas. It isn't Puma. It isn't even some giant sportswear company. Nike's biggest threat is something much more dangerous. The possibility of becoming irrelevant. And almost nobody is talking about it. Because when most people think about business competition, they imagine two companies fighting for customers, like Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Apple versus Samsung, Nike versus Adidas. But what if the real battle isn't against another company? What if the battle is against changing consumer behavior itself? Let me explain. For years, Nike dominated because it understood one thing better than almost anyone else. People don't buy products, they buy stories. When you wore Nike, you weren't just wearing shoes. You were wearing Michael Jordan. You were wearing greatness. You were wearing the idea that if you worked hard enough, you could achieve anything. Nike became a cultural symbol, and that strategy worked brilliantly for decades. But the world has changed. Today's consumers behave differently, especially younger consumers. A few years ago, people often bought brands because those brands represented status. Today, many consumers buy products because they represent values. That's a very important shift. People increasingly care about sustainability, authenticity, community, individuality. And that's where Nike faces a challenge. Because when a company becomes extremely large, it becomes harder to feel personal, harder to feel authentic, harder to feel like the underdog. And consumers often love underdogs. That's why smaller challenger brands have started gaining attention. Brands like On, brands like Hoka, brands that were almost unknown a few years ago. These companies aren't beating Nike because they have bigger budgets. They don't. They're winning attention because they offer something different, a fresh story, a fresh identity. And in fashion, attention is everything. Think about it this way. When a new restaurant opens in town, people get curious. They want to try something different. The same thing happens with brands. Consumers constantly look for what's new, what's exciting, what's next. And that's a dangerous environment for a company whose biggest strength comes from its legacy. Because legacy can become a double-edged sword. The things that made Nike successful can also make it look old. And Nike knows this. That's why in recent years, the company has been trying to reinvent itself, experimenting with direct-to-consumer sales, investing heavily in digital experiences, building stronger connections with communities, trying to become more than just a shoe company. Because Nike understands a simple truth. The future of branding isn't just about being famous. It's about staying culturally relevant. And cultural relevance is incredibly difficult to maintain. Just ask companies that were once considered unstoppable. Many of them didn't disappear because their products became bad. They disappeared because they stopped mattering. Consumers moved on. Trends changed. New stories emerged. And suddenly, a giant became invisible. That's the nightmare scenario for any brand. Not being hated, being forgotten. Now, to be clear, Nike is far from being forgotten. The company remains enormously powerful. It generates billions in revenue. Its logo is recognized across the globe. Most businesses would dream of having even 1% of Nike's brand power. But that's exactly why this story is fascinating. Because when you're already at the top, growth becomes harder. The challenge isn't getting attention. The challenge is keeping it. Every year, every decade, every generation.
And that's the real battle Nike's fighting today. Not against Adidas, not against Puma, not even against smaller challenger brands. It's fighting against the natural life cycle of cultural relevance. The fight to remain exciting in a world that constantly craves something new. And that might be the hardest competition any company can face. So, the next time you see the Nike swoosh, remember this. The biggest question isn't whether Nike can make great shoes.
It's whether Nike can continue to matter. Because in business, the moment people stop caring, even the strongest brands start to fade. And for Nike, that's the challenge that matters more than anything else. If you enjoyed this breakdown of branding, business strategy, and the forces shaping global companies, subscribe for more business stories that reveal what's really happening behind the world's biggest brands.